All right, Derek, can you hear me, my friend?
Absolutely. How are you
Oh,
doing this fine evening, Matty?
I am. I am less stressed after I got a nap, and my cat is drinking water for the first time in over a week by herself. So,
Fantastic. So
yes,
things are developing.
yes, in a positive direction. Um, all right, so we're gonna begin, everyone. Here, we're gonna start our workshop. Derek and I are gonna talk for a little bit here about horror and terror and sci-fi style horror. Last night we had discussed uh, Vampire the Masquerade, which offers a lot of different types of horror. Thematically, it would probably be more like street level, urban. We did get into concepts that there can be cosmic horror or eldritch horror, of course, personal and political as well. But Alien is going to offer a different type of horror for you all. Now, uh, I keep things PG-13 because I'm the cool tryhard dad who will take you out for hot dogs after Little League sport. Derek is the rough and tumble uncle who's always working on the Ford Mustang in the garage, and we'll give you the cold beer as long as you don't tell the cool dad that he did it. And you'll listen to AC/DC or whatever on a hot summer day and learn about that stuff. So we are an interesting yin yang dynamic, and of course, it wouldn't be a horror stream then without having MacabreDerek, because with him, you do get exactly what it says on the tin. Uh, and I would invite you all to join him over in the Mosh Pit, which is his community. The Hero Zone is mine. And the Mosh Pit is it's a fun place, and you experience it for yourself. But just know that it is not PG-13. And let's see. Raven already gave you the traditional shout out command. I'm gonna try the newfangled one as well. If you aren't already subscribe to Derek, of course, because your subscriptions actually do a lot, especially if you like art, because your subscriptions are what allows him to do preview sketches for every one of you who gets commissions from Derek. And that is extra time that is donated into by people who want to support that community and make sure that he toils away until his fingers are not but bony nubs. Uh,
Ironically, while the whole topic was on aliens, I was working on one here actually while you ended up jumping in. I will send that to you, Maddie, whether you want to end up showcasing what it is I'm working on a spicy take of she venom.
yes. Uh,
But not while not necessarily completely on topic. Well, let's just say that I'm not opposed to this form of characterization.
uh, if you want, actually, I think that would be perfect. As We have the 1 month only, Spooky Nerds place. If you want to drop that in Spooky Nerds on our Discord, I think that would be perfect for it. Because Spooky
Well,
Nerds is for more like spooky takes and horror takes that we can push things up to the like age 16 plus. As long as it's along those lines. And yes, I would absolutely consider that drawing to be related to aliens. Though that one's a more symbiotic relationship and not what we usually get with xenomorphs.
oh, absolutely not. But I figured it because I was just figuring around and trying to end up utilizing my time somewhat wisely.
Oh,
So,
oh yeah, of course. I love it. So that's a good work in progress of Derek's style, Western comic book style, like dark, heavy inking. If you want full color stuff, you can do it, and I will absolutely shill for you, Derek. I am hashtag not sponsored, but as a person who has bought a lot of art through Derek, I will be happy to recommend that if you all want something drawn up, even if he can't do it on Twitch, he'll work with you. Um, Give him a look, and especially for the rest of this month. Look, y'all, we're halfway through it. It's already October 15th. Get in now and commission Derek. He is doing a special Goretober sale, if you have something spooky, scary skeleton that you want him to draw for you, he will. His rates on that genre is at $10 an hour. Get in and reserve chunks of his time now while you still have a couple weeks left in this month. He will work with you. He'll communicate with you. He wants you to be happy with the art that you get. You wanna have him draw spooky locations, monsters, VTM characters. You want him to draw D&D characters. He's drawn a lot for me for D&D. And we will be discussing D&D in the course of this workshop as well, as that's what many of us are very familiar with, and that's usually what we come together to discuss. So I do want to draw, I want to have horror be the umbrella. On one side is D&D and some comparisons for our consideration there, and then I want to get into the horror elements of Alien RPG too. But yeah, go over and give Derek a look, a follow, join his Discord, and get some art from this dude.
Zurich, I have gone through the liberty of grabbing some appropriate pieces for the Spooky Nerds portion of Maddie's Discord, because I know that everybody gets sick and tired of having 2, 3, 4 dozen Discords that you check in maybe once a month. I get that, right? So I'm going to make it easier for you and everybody else to kind of just end up here taking a look. I put a few here pieces that are related, a lot of them VTM here, content and otherwise, but still on the tamer side, shall we say, of what I typically do. So if you're wanting to take a look at that, there you go.
Video Goth, if you want him drawing meerkats playing poker, I will tell you, I will urge you all, challenge Derek. Give him weird commissions. Have him draw something cute and watch him squirm live for you on his channel. But I will tell you, I challenge Derek to draw a scene from the Vampire the Masquerade Chronicle that I'm playing in. So this will be a quick callback to our conversation for VTM. My character, BJ Tucker, is a gangrel, a very animalistic vampire. This is the super redux version. He possessed a muskrat. He spiritually possessed a muskrat after tying duct taping a GoPro to its head, and had a fellow gangrel use his familiar for D&D players, a famulus, which was a red-tail hawk, to carry the muskrat. Oh, I'm sorry, I put the muskrat in a cat harness, the type that has a handle on the back. So this muskrat was being carried by a very potent red-tail hawk, because it had vampire blood in it, and was carried into a werewolf graveyard to do some reconnaissance. Because there might be some things afoot, and I would prefer not to die again, because I'm already a vampire. And so I asked Derek, can you draw a vampiric, a vampire possessed muskrat with a GoPro on its head being carried by a Gould, effectively a Gould hawk, going into a werewolf graveyard? And he said yes, and he did, and I was super happy with it. So if you want him drawing meerkats playing poker, Video Goth, challenge him.
Typically, when given odd requests at that, the worst case scenario answer you will ever get out of me is, I don't know, let's find out.
All right. Well, so we blushed upon D&D and we blushed upon VTM, and we can touch back on those elements as well, right? As our week rolls out, I want to keep going back to the things that we've looked at, to the things that we've discussed, where fear is born from the unknown, and the unknown is a pocket in reality. Our reality is made up of atmosphere, norms, values, morals, and beliefs, and the ways that we can pierce into this reality are through suspense, fear, violence, gore, and the supernatural. And there's also an academic approach that we can take to look at elements inside of Alien RPG, and we're also going to bring it back to D&D, because if I'm going to talk about xenomorphs and you're even vaguely familiar with xenomorphs, you can probably think of a couple D&D monsters that we are going to bring up in the course of the conversation tonight. So I will invoke those, and Derek and I can have a back and forth about it. As we do explore Alien RPG, this is not going to be this is not a character building workshop. I'm not going to get into the minutia of the game where we're going to make randomized characters like we do in D&D, or we're going to plot out an entire cinematic story. Pardon me, or the like. This is not getting into the nitty gritty of the mechanics. We're going to be talking about horror and mostly terror, and how Alien RPG can present it. Some concepts here, and let's tie it back to D&D, because that is the common touchstone for us, where most of us have met, and we've formed our bonds of friendship and understanding, our mascots, memes, etc. Absolutely, Vezrik, we will. And let's get into this aspect here. There are three things that we can bring up, and what do they mean when we talk about them? Horror, the feeling of revulsion that usually follows a frightening sight, sound, or otherwise an experience. These are the you need to change your pants moments. Horror is what happens when you discover the body. Horror is what happens when you open the Necronomicon and you discover the impure secrets contained within. It is the thing that is after. Terror is the feeling of dread and anticipation that precedes the horrifying experience. This is the buildup. And many of you already, as soon as I said Alien RPG, that alone might have already started the process of terror, because there are many of you who might understand the horror of Alien and that whole franchise. And a lot of this storytelling and this system is a lot more emphasis, in my opinion, on the terror, on the buildup, on the anticipation that things are getting really scary. And a lot of us, if you sign up to play a game of Alien RPG, you might already have an idea of what could happen to you. The question is, how will you get there? And of course, will you survive? And then the last concept to bring up is the thriller. What are thrills? What is thrilling? An exciting, suspenseful player story, especially a mystery. This is the what happens next. Or instead of messing the seat of your pants, this is keeping you on the edge of your seat. And so this would be a lot of segments in the Aliens, the second movie, would be very good for the thriller. Because, yes, there is some terror and there's definitely horror, but there's a lot of sequences where even if you're aghast at everything that's happening, there's that, what's going to happen next? Oh, wait, something else is going to happen that tops this? It's that morbid, I can't look away. And I will also argue, there's specific elements, a lot of this game is going to feature the atmosphere that is going to be built, that where the horror, the terror, and everything is really going to push against by any of these five elements here. Because you can hear it in our background now noise. This is the Nostromo. And I mean, maybe the volume's a little low, but I want it to be there. But this role-playing game is spending a lot of time here. Well, apparently my PDF reader is like, what? No, I read a PDF in this economy? All right, Vampire the Masquerade works.
You must be mad.
Yeah, and our academic approach to horror is working. There we go. All right. A lot of this is building up the atmosphere, some of the expectations, the world, or the time in which you're playing as well. And this is the RPG version of an Alien Isolation. When you play that game, the atmosphere in that game is so much a part of it. And Derek, having played Alien Isolation, would you agree to that?
I would say so. One of the big things is that, and this is kind of unique to Alien Isolation, especially in its first part, was just how well it ended up making you keep your head on a swivel. That is not a mechanical thing that is taught. That is entirely instinctual, and that's one of those fascinating little responses in that game specifically because of the nature of the AI of the alien in Alien Isolation. I kind of found it fascinating, really. Though I will admit, when you realize that tracker, that little beeping, it can hear that. Yeah, that realization dawns on you. You know, a little too late, more often than not. And I know a few people who have succumbed to that because they haven't noticed that, which to me I find hilarious. It's one of those things where you're clearly still thinking in game terms at that exact moment, and maybe forgetting that this pulsing beep as it gets closer, well, bad things are just going to have to happen now.
From a storytelling, and in this case the cinematic approach, because the tracker has been a part of the Alien franchise. It is an amazing device for telling the story and really saturating your atmosphere with terror. Because even though it's a device that helps you, when you hear that zip, 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 and you don't need to see a person in a costume. No practical effects or digital effects are needed. One sound effect is enough to start getting you on the edge of that seat. And especially when with what Derek, like, you're so engrossed, that's your sound, that's your indicator. Well, it's also a noise that other people can hear, or other things can hear too. Well, other former people can hear. Now, this system is going to focus on suspense, horror, terror in two different ways. It features cinematic play, and these are more or less one shots, right? It's you and your friends getting together for an evening, and just like you would watch an Alien movie or even sit down and Alien has been in comic book form for a long time as well. And you can read stories there. There's also novelizations. You can spend an evening where it's a one shot and probably one of you at the table will live. And so it's kind of a question of who will be the one that does that. And then there's campaign play, which is more over several game sessions. It says perhaps even dozens of sessions. This is not that you can't run it longer. How do I want to put this? The style of the horror of Alien is for that hard-hitting, like traumatic scares, where cinematic play is it's one night, right? It's a new character, you might not make it, and what's going to happen to you. And so your heart rate goes for that quick, intense experience like you're watching a movie. And even in campaign play, once the knowledge of the alien is there, not that it's no longer scary, because it can be, but it might go from horror, which is an overlap of two different qualities that we've talked about and we'll get into a little bit later. But it might go into more of, well, I'm frightened of the alien, but the alien isn't necessarily a horrific thing for me. And if you want to keep that feeling of horror alive, of suspense, of the terror and the buildup, these types of stories, in my opinion, are going to be more for a shorter form, a series, a one or two shot, or a short form campaign where you go, all right, everyone, we're going to play Weyland-Yutani researchers, and we're, and your story is in a research facility, or you want to play a bunch of colonial marines, and you want to be, you want to have all the quips and badass stuff and the gear, and you want to go on a bug hunt. You can do that as well. But the unknown is what keeps fear going. And in Alien, it's often a process of revelation, of discovering just what is going on. For instance, what is going on with my PDF that it doesn't want to... My gosh. All right, hopefully that will fix it. Sorry, everyone. I hope that wasn't too annoying and flashing. I don't know what was happening here. So there's things, it'll build up the environment. That's for you to read. All right, you think about, do you want to be space truckers? Do you want to be whatever? But where is the terror? How is this system, like we discovered with Vampire the Masquerade, going to be making you want to... Well, you don't want to, need to change your pants, but how will it make you do that? Well, we don't need to read about encumbrance and consumables. Those are minutia rules. There is a particular mechanic amid all the very beautiful art, in my opinion. Now, Derek, as an artist, you might go like, no, okay, that's an opinion, all right. But at least the art to me at least conveys what's going on, and it's very easy to read. So for a normie like me to this sort of stuff, I go, ooh, that looks cool. Anyway, there's different ways that you can confront your fears as a colonial marine, a colonial marshal, a company agent. Do you want to be the person on the inside? This would be similar to the different clans. This is the broad concept, everyone. Similar clans in Vampire, where you have an angle. There are certain things that you are better at than others, because it is a part of what you are. In that regard, in D&D, to bring it back, this would be kind of like choosing your class. You could be a company agent. You could play as a kid. Kid is a quote-unquote like a class, right, in D&D terms. And in fact, do you all want to spend your night where all of you are newt in an overrun colony and see which, how many of you can survive or get out or, make it to the last escape shuttle or something like that? And of course, kids have their own unique things that they can do that the adult characters can't. And also, let this also be a point of horror. Just as Derek was discussing, the clans all have their thing. Pick your personal trauma, and we can personify it through your characters in VTM. These are different ways that you can either be the insider. You might even end up being a rival, because that's another a rival to other players. That's a mechanic that's built into the system too. But you want to ramp stuff up? Here you go. You're a kid. You don't necessarily get colonial marine training and musculature and equipment. How long can you survive in Hadley's Hope? I mean, Newt did a pretty good job, but I wonder about you.
There is something else that I'd like to end up bringing up.
Yeah.
Because I have a hot take that I know very few people will agree with me. But I will say that, especially for a role-playing game, the third movie probably makes one of the best use of settings going in the entire thing. Because first movie, it's sheer isolation. We're trapped in the ship with this thing. Right? Second one, we're going back to planet. We got the colonial marines. It's built a lot more action-oriented. But it's also there to convey the threat, right? We knew that these things... The xenomorph was stronger than the space truckers, but now you have what is the colonial marines, the best of the best, hoorah, right?
Yep.
But then all of a sudden, when it comes to a colony, they get overwhelmed. But when it really works, especially when you're taking a look at horror, the third movie is a fantastic little journey when you are dealing with points of inevitability. Because remember, the spoilers for a movie that's way older than most of you at this point, I would suspect.
Derek, we can actually say that sort of stuff. Oh, gross.
Yeah, what, you feel old yet, Maddie?
Well, I remember seeing the banners for Alien 3 in a movie theater. I'm like, I'm really scared to actually go see that. Yeah.
Well, sucks to be you, Bane. Buckle up. But you ended up having in 3, one of the things I absolutely loved about it was a sense of how this penal colony, this mining colony, operated. Right? How it was effectively a skeleton crew trying to keep the pilot light on, and it was a perpetual piece of watching everything play off. And when I look at this player selection, right, I actually want to challenge something that might be an assumption. Everybody ends up saying, okay, so we think of these as classes. No, each one of these is utterly independent. I'll argue, like, if you take a look at Alien 3, there was no Colonial Marine in the party. Yeah. Right? I could argue the Colonel Marshall. Absolutely. Guess what? You had two of them in there. You know? But did you have a company agent? Yeah, I guess you could argue that, but, you know, what did you have? You had one medic, effectively, yeah, well, like one officer and a bunch of roughnecks. That's about it, yeah. Right? And you watch as they're trying to end up making use of, like, what do they have? A handful of hand tools and, you know, a old smelter. That is it. The premise that this game can take comes down to what is the world, what is the environment you're putting the alien in. It works primarily well in, say it with me, folks, isolation. That's half the fun of when you're here looking. When it comes to Alien, you might find this threat of, okay, they got to Earth and what have you, but that changes the complete tone of the game. The tone of horror works especially well, not only when you have no hope of contacting the outside, but, well, let's take a look at another Alien movie. I don't mean, like, the franchise. I'm talking about a completely different series. The Thing, right? Then the temptation to contact the outside world is ultimately the big threat, right? Most of them have already written themselves off as they're pretty much dead already, and if you watch the rest of the film, you'll understand why. But there's a temptation to contact, and that unto itself becomes a threat. It inverts the whole idea of we need to go and get help. We need to get out of here, right? You can have that with Alien. You can pull from all kinds of media when it comes down to that particular archetype, but the common threads: isolation. You can't get help, or it's a terrible idea to go get help, right? Because if a single xenomorph, if a single queen is capable of getting off-world, you've condemned a whole nother world to this. You can also end up taking a look at the idea of, you know, the original bit, truckers in space. Fantastic bit, you know, you didn't have all these other little tidbits. You could, I'm hesitant to bring it up, but Resurrection. You know, you can play the scientist who is on his last legs. You can play the colonel who is completely out there. You can play these criminal archetypes and all this. But ultimately, you need to end up first considering the locale. Where is this happening? So, abandoned mining facilities, obviously here, spacecraft. The idea that this has to stop from getting back to Earth is always a classic.
Yep.
You have all of these options, and in space, the threat is not where do you go, it's the fact that the closest place home is several lifetimes away. Suddenly crack the freezing pods in a horrible accident, and now everybody is flipping out. What the hell do we end up doing? Because none of us are going to survive the journey.
It just, survival itself is very scary. And you're right, Vezrik, the big bad thing doesn't always have to be the xenomorph. As Derek was describing, just being stuck on a ship with other people who might turn cannibalistic or go, you know, get space madness, to invoke the Ren and Stimpy episode. And there's other worlds. There could be other aliens. And in fact, it's indirect to the xenomorphs, but this system does take the black goo into consideration. for any of you who've seen the other films that would lead into the quadrilogy, which was Prometheus and Alien Covenant. And if you know what the black goo is, that is also a consideration in this world. The Yautja, or the Predators, they are not mentioned as far as I know in this system, but we know that in Predator 2, if you look closely in one of the end scenes, there's an alien skull as a trophy in one of their ships. And of course, there's Alien versus Predator films and comics. I remember, Derek, again, aging myself, I remember that really awesome AVP video game in the arcades. Where you got the big colonel that was totally not Arnold Schwarzenegger, that had the cannon arm, and you could play like different types of Predators and everything. Amazing, awesome, and I loved it. And also, in Isolation and in the movies, if not your fellow humans, well, there's an AI system, and AI does not always play nicely.
I can't do that, Dave. But
nothing more terrifying than oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Nothing more terrifying than running through Sevastopol with a well-natured working Joe just simply following you with a bit of a grindy sounding tut 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 tut. Like you ought not do that. Like almost a proper, but you know that it's gonna break your neck if it catches you, sort of a thing. Go ahead with what you were gonna say, though.
Oh, nothing. I got distracted because Vizorek was talking about comics and immediately reminded me that somewhere in my collection I have the full collection of Superman versus Aliens.
I didn't know Superman threw down with him. I knew there was a Batman one.
Yeah. It's actually a little bit more interesting. I would argue that Superman versus Aliens works a lot better in that regard. Ironically, that comic art was phenomenal. But the big thing that ended up grasping me is they were very much on brand with the iconography of the Aliens film.
Oh.
It was pretty damn good, and at least there was some threat because, you know, Superman gets his powers from the sun. Well, problem when you're way out in deep space and you've not recharge yourself for a bit, you know, he starts getting predominantly weaker and weaker. And so now it turns into this wonderful little war of attrition. That being said, you know, let's get back to Alien. You're talking about, or you're currently on stress level, panic, and all this stuff. And I'm just showing this on mechanic. I'm not going to go into details on the mechanics as I'm still learning them, but I can end up pulling from other horror games that I've run. And I'm going to say right now, one of the hardest things on the planet for especially new role players to do is to play into the stress, panic, mechanic here. Back to VTM for a brief second. VTM has a mechanic called compulsions, where you are actively penalized for not operating in a very specific way because you have this compulsion kicking off.
Mm-hmm.
Be it, you know, hunger, dominance, harm, whatever it is. Well, the same is true when it comes down to any game that ends up saying, hey, there's actually a mechanic here that can affect your character's psychology. And I think a lot of us do end up taking a lot of our role-playing basis from, well, that would be a good example. Critical Role, right? Everybody wants to talk about Matt Mercer. Well, you take a look at what they do, and they very much play into what you would expect to happen and how it starts to strain you. But here, you are actually using a mechanic to basically give you a role-playing prompt. And I'm going to tell you right now, the secret to every good horror-style tabletop RPG will always end up coming down to your reactions. If the players react like something doesn't really matter, then it's very hard to maintain that atmosphere. Yep. You can pour it on as much as possible, but if they're cracking jokes every 3 seconds, it completely breaks immersion. So one of the things you as a player can do is try and lean into it. start to lean into those moments. And as you start to do so, you start to add to the flavor of the game. And that's really important, especially with Alien, because, well, not only the stress and panic mechanics there, but let's be real here. You are 90% of the people you're here playing probably have no idea about the xenomorph itself. It's a classified secret in Weyland-Yutani. It's every single incident that has been recorded has been covered up. Everything from the Nostromo to the mining colony. You have it's a highly guarded secret because Weyland-Yutani really wants to end up getting this creature. They want to study it. They want to be able to use it. And because of that, there are quite a few people who are utterly ignorant to what this can do. The plus side, and this is something I think a lot of you can take away, if you're a huge fan of Aliens, and you got a few people who are a fan of Alien, it's hard to work with it's harder to work with because they already know the creature.
Mm-hmm.
So you need to be able to figure out, okay, the alien itself might not be the primary threat. It might more often be the catalyst. Again, I'll end up quoting what's ended up happening in... sorry, I'm blanking for a second. Taking a look at what was happening in Aliens. The aliens were a threat, but they weren't the primary antagonist. In fact, that could arguably be Burke. Right?
Yep.
That can arguably be Burke, because the aliens are operating on animal instinct. They're a force of nature, but they're not an antagonist. There's a clear difference between force of nature and antagonist. When we're taking a look at this, obviously, Weyland-Yutani is not good people. I think I ended up selling my stocks from Umbrella, and I bought some Weyland-Yutani recently. But I like the cut of their jib, and they're ambitious. So
we got to go to Mars, Derek.
We got to go to Mars.
Umbrella's not going to get us there.
No.
So
because it's your channel, I'm not going to make a joke. Okay, I'm behaving, Maddie. I'm behaving. Don't you appreciate the restraint I use when on your channel?
I appreciate that. I don't have to put you into a containment force field. So the mechanics were brought up because, yes, as much as we do want to personally get into it, and to a degree, we can suspend disbelief. Though ultimately there are meta-knowledges or our own fears or lack thereof. And so a lot of games will offer mechanics that will change the rules of how you play to at least simulate, if not simulate fear, then to at least get you unsettled in how you're playing because the stakes are a lot higher. And so Derek was talking about those in Vampire, and I also brought up when he was talking about that, in the Dungeon Master's Guide, there are different forms of madness. There's, of course, just the condition of being afraid of something. You got to move away. Because we're going to tie this back to D&D, since that's bread and butter for most of us here. And so the mechanics in Alien RPG, there are actually a few. And the pushing your roll, the stress, and especially when you break and there's a panic, that's the big one. Though, especially in cinematic form play, it is encouraged that each of the characters are given a private goal, almost like their own winning condition, where if you were going back and you're playing the scientist, at any cost, you have to get a sample out of the lab. Now, it's probably good if other people don't know that's what you're doing, because they might try and stop you. Or, I don't know, you got to get a sample out of the lab in another character, meaning that while, yes, you're all on the same team, you are an antagonist as well. And so there's a lot of private goals that are encouraged for you all to work out roleplay-wise. Between the players and the GM. In this case, it's the game mother, as Mother is the the overarching computer AI system in the Alien setting. So there is intrigue that they want to build into it. And of course, Vampire has that because each vampire has personal goals. You can't regain your willpower unless you're fulfilling your personal goals, which could run against your other members of your coterie, against your elders, against the masquerade, depending on the circumstances. And so this game also does feature, hey, you have a character with a particular mission, or sometimes if you want to live, living means running faster than the person next to you. And that might mean that you shoot him in the foot on the way out, and you say your sacrifice will be noted in the records, and you run off, kind of a thing. Though the overarching mechanic, as this is a D6 based system, is you build up stress dice. And the symbols that you see here, these are for the custom dice you can get, but you can play with regular D6s. These are 6s on your normal rolls, which are these symbols, and the little face huggers are 1s on D6s that you would designate as stress dice. So pushing yourself builds tension to a point where you risk going into wild panic or a violent outburst. When you push a roll, your stress level immediately increases by 1 point. This would be kind of like succeeding at a cost in Vampire, or depending, maybe you bribe your DM with a slice of pizza, or you cash in an inspiration. You lose a resource in some way in that regard. When you push a roll, your stress level increases. When making skill rolls, including the immediate... Okay, that's the minutia. Your stress level increases. And there are different ways that you can... Oh, come on.
Maddie, while you're discussing this,
there we go.
My brain has been doing the association game again. I know that's dangerous. Here's a thought for you. You can play as a kid, right?
Yep.
What if you've been alone on that station like Newt, except mother was still active and online?
As something to talk to or interact with?
Yeah. Now take it quite literal. You are dealing with a child who is now talking to the computer, calling it mother the whole time. And start building that familiar connection. You'll be protected. You'll be here safe here, child, so long as you end up getting the sample. There's some Marines coming in. All you need to do is get a sample off planet.
Yep. I hope y'all are writing that down, because that's really good. That's really good. All right, there's rules of combat. Again, I'm not here to talk about building your dice pools. You do build D6 dice pools. If you've played World of Darkness, you'll be familiar with that concept. Dice pools are built in other games, not necessarily in D&D, but there's things you can do to be better at attacking or defending or stealthing or whatever, blocking rolls. That I will let you all read about the minutia of ranged combat and melee. Here we go. Stress and panic. The mounting tension in your character is measured by their stress level. It usually starts at 0 and increases during the course of that game. Your stress level increases by 1 whenever the following happens. You push a skill roll. You fire a burst of full auto fire. And, on my first reading, I was thinking about that. Like, but if you have a machine gun, you should just be able to pull the trigger, right? And it occurred to me that the reason why this mechanic would come into play is if you're having to go full auto and expend your precious ammunition, it's because there's an emergency, and that would increase your stress. Just because you're in the army and you have a machine gun doesn't necessarily mean that you just go out and you have a fun day on the range. If you're firing your machine gun full auto, there's things that are happening. And even if you're on a range, that is going to increase your tension and your heart rate because you're trying to become accurate with it. You're trying to also not have the device jam up. You might be concerned about that because results like that can happen too, where you got to clear a jam. And it's tough to clear a jam when you have visitors. You suffer 1 or more points of damage. You go without sleep, food, or water. which, taking a quick peek at the character sheet, there are conditions: starving, dehydrated, exhausted, because survival, as Derek brought up earlier, is a stress mechanic, is a terror building mechanic. You're the desperate child, and you're getting rewards, and you're eating whatever you can. You might even have to go through and, well, this was my pet. I'm sorry, but I want to live.
Yeah. Spend a few months licking the condensation off of the pipes in the basement, and tell me how well you're holding up.
Yep. You perform a coup de grace. A scientist in your team fails to use the analysis talent. That might be another point where you go, what? If you are a roughneck, if you're a kid, if you're anyone else, and you have the professional there who can who can address the unknown. Remember, this is the core of horror, of fear. You have someone whose job it is, with the latest equipment or whatever, to give you answers, and they can't. That will increase your stress. Oh, well, if the xenobiologist can't tell me what's going on, what are we dealing with? A member of your own crew attacks you. And here's another one. I thought you might have been going in this direction, although I like the direction you actually took it, Derek. A person nearby is revealed to be an android. Of course, that is something that's sort of woven into the history of alien media. But for that same kid who thought that he or she was talking to a mother figure, maybe that was the misinterpretation. You finally get to the computer room. You're like, oh, but Mother's here. Hang on, we got to rescue Mother. And then you find out the whole time that Mother is nothing more than chips and wires. And the horror sets in that you were being used by the computer instead of the other way around. You encounter certain creatures, or this is kind of the catch-all, creatures or locations as determined in the scenario. You find the specimen lab with tubes full of facehuggers, or malformed things that ask you to kill them. What are other things that we can pull up there? But some of these might seem very specific, but for that reason, if you're needing to go full auto, whether it is because your life is in danger, or you're just like, you're the adrenaline's pumping because, yeah, woohoo, your stress is building. Bane says, ironically, Mother turns out to be the Red Queen, and as you finally get her into the room to rescue her, she flatly calls out, "You're all going to die down here."
It's a classic.
You know what? So the Colonial Marines, instead of setting up their turret guns, should have set up the Hall lasers. That would have made that scene very interesting, actually. I don't know if it'd be more intense, but it would be interesting seeing that. If any of you know, it's a scene, but instead of sentry guns firing into a hallway, you set up the lasers. So as your stress builds, this actually, in this game, it adds to your dice pool, because you can actually get better results. If you roll a lot of successes, you can actually perform what are called stunts. You can say that references back to cinematic, like, oh, you do a flip or whatever, which is kind of what you do. Or it lets you hit extra targets, or you have a lot of options. It's actually a very cool system, in my opinion. You can fire off a shot, but if you do super well, maybe that shot actually shoots and knocks down. And that's what you want to make your extra success into. So panicking, stressing may help you focus. Right, your adrenaline's going. Maybe you're kind of doing a bullet time thing, whereas unfortunately the Toreador can't necessarily turn that off. But we can, right? We have normal adrenal glands, and so it'll actually make it so you will succeed more. It's an interesting blend where some stress is not necessarily bad, but the more stressed you get, the closer you get to a panic. As long as you keep your stress in check, you can use it to your advantage. But if the tension grows too strong, it can explode. sending you into a wild panic. You need to make a panic roll when any of the following happens. You roll one or more facehuggers on your stress. That's a 1 on your stress die on a skill roll. If this happens, you can't push the next skill roll. Instead, roll for panic. You witness a friendly character suffering from a certain panic effect. You're pinned. So a list of some things here. There are ways to stop it, to relieve it, especially in downtime, because there are mechanics, various talents that people have, where after the combat, you sort of like joke, right? You got to get the point of light, you got to get some humor in before you can build the tension, the terror to the point of horror again. But there are things that this will have you do, similar to the vampiric, either the beast taking over or your particular clan flaw manifests. The gangrel become more bestial. The Bruja become more Hulk out kind of a thing. The low level stuff, in fact, 1 to 6, you even have a budget. 1 to 6 stress, you're keeping it together. It's just like you're warmed up. You're staying frosty. You're on the alert. You're getting some of those bonuses, but there's always the risk of more panic. Nervous twitch, a tremble, you drop your item. Things are getting a little bit more intense. You freeze. Or you must use your next action to move away and find a safe spot. You scream. You scream your lungs out for 1 round, losing your next slow action. You flee. You go berserk. You must immediately attack the nearest person or creature, friendly or not. Or, the worst of all, and we've seen this in horror generally, and this would not be a foreign concept to the Alien franchise. The worst is just catatonic. You collapse to the floor and can't talk or move, staring blankly into oblivion. Whatever's going to happen is going to happen. And there are ways that this can, that the stress can build up through the different conditions: dehydrated, freezing, starving. Having run Alien RPG, I ran Destroyer of Worlds for my group of local friends here. The panic panic can build pretty interestingly, and have various effects that, in the course of combat, play out where instead of trying to shoot an enemy of some sort, you might be spending that turn trying to snap the person out of it, in various ways that you might be able to, using skills to command them or a drug or something along those lines. And it does simulate the fact that in stressful situations, there are people who will just shut down. We're talking about sci-fi and horror, Derek. That catatonic almost reminds me of the StarCraft Brood War intro cutscene, where the medic, after showing the Marine where their air support is just sitting there listening to music. The visor rolls down, and, well, it's called Brood War for a reason.
Absolutely.
That medic was just like, it's done,
If I recall, it wasn't a medic, it was Firebat.
Oh, was it a Firebat? Okay.
Firebat was kind of sitting there and he immediately points upward to end up seeing the battlecruiser directly overhead. And then realize they just decide to end up bailing on him. It's like, well, we're done. And there's something that's always fun to end up playing with when it comes down to the inevitable that you can definitely end up bringing to any Alien game. When we're taking a look at all of these different, you're currently talking about ways you end up taking damage and what have you, falling, explosions, fire, disease. You can end up playing with all manners of different applications, especially when it comes down to an unknown like the xenomorph. I think one of the best things about the xenomorph is it is adaptive. It will use whatever is around it to create new xenomorphs that are adapted specifically to whatever environment it finds itself in. That's one of its biggest advantages in that regard. So what you're always looking for is, how do you end up playing off of that? how do you make it a little bit more niche? It's not always a defensive adaptation, mind you. It's not just it can breathe in particular environments or swim really well because you're on a water planet, or really good when it comes down to ice, or whatever your notations are. You can go about and have it creating something else. Maybe it has become or is able to produce pathogens. Maybe it itself is suddenly becoming incredibly territorial, and the way it does so is by, in some way, shape, or form, corrupting the environment it's in. More so than what we see in its hives. Like, this is just a natural bit of development, not something crafted, but just by its sheer presence. You can play around with this and bring back the unknown to the xenomorph. The irony of the xenomorph as we know it is that ultimately we know too much about it to end up knowing it's afraid, but or what to be afraid of it as an unknown, if unless you give the premise of why it might have shifted, something about its environment. And this comes back down to environmental storytelling, the ability to set the atmosphere, to give a status quo. One of the most important things you can end up doing, especially in your first game or two, is trying to end up finding, how do I end up making sure that they understand the world that they're in, the very nature of what the situation is.
Mm-hmm.
Being in a corporate office is very different from being in a drop ship for a marine company. Very different from being in a loader, as I say on your screen, doing all the heavy lifting. Again, truckers in space.
Yep.
You need to end up making that and the environment they work in. What's the machinery they use? Why do they use it? Does that loader looks like it works fairly well up until you end up going into minus 50 Celsius weather. Now all of a sudden they got to change what they're doing, right? The equipment isn't built for it. If you're on particularly rugged terrain, Marines are not going to drop in the standard vehicle you've seen in Aliens. They're probably going to have another method of going about it. And realizing what they have managed to end up building, the huge bit is understanding the atmosphere. And one of the big things it ends up doing with that is, well, first off, immediately when you involve Wailing Yutani, the second that you end up doing that, immediately that brings everybody's attention up. Oh, okay, well, I know they're the bad guys and all that. Well, guess what? You can just have it mentioned and never really bring it to huge prominence. Just have them use it as a red herring to end up making them look in a different direction. Because they're metagaming at that point, and that can actually come back to bite you in the backside.
We had brought up something similar when discussing generic horror, and it could even be brought up in Vampire. If you as the DM are getting into the details of things, and we were talking about the moon cycle, you as a player, if you don't know any better, are going to go, why is the cycle of the moon relevant to what my storyteller in Vampire, or what, why is my DM in Dungeons and Dragons giving me an update every time we take a long rest at the cycle of the moon? What's going on there? If that only raises tension and suspicion, you're still keeping your players engaged. It could build to something, but it also, you're just using it as the atmosphere, as the environment. Derek, if you still have some time to join us, I do got to get up and take a quick break. And we can come back, and if you do have a little bit more time, I'd like to talk to you about how we can tell a couple different stories, kind of like what you were just getting into. How can we tell a horror story through the elements that maybe aren't always just the xenomorphs? They're the classic, right? We're playing Alien RPG. That's a presumption, and they're very scary. But how could we do something like you were talking about, Burke actually being the villain of Aliens? Or we could do something where it's an overarching threat, or how we can use suspense, fear, violence. And I also want to bring up, because Orchid Twilight mentioned something very interesting. She says that in Chinese mythology, there's a type of dragon that actually acts like a xenomorph does, like a face hugger almost.
Actually, there's a tie-in to that in Alien 3. Remember, the alien there was referred to as the dragon.
Oh yeah, that's right. Now that you mention, the gears are turning. Well, everyone, let's take a. Oh, go ahead.
Maddie, you might have ended up underestimating my nerd cred when it comes down to horror.
And it was there, it was staring at me the whole time. You are MacabreDerek. All right, everyone, let's take a quick break. Do what you got to do. Use the restroom, get a snack or a drink, hug a loved one because you're scared, and we'll come back. And I do want to talk about Orchid. Orchid mentioned that they were like kind of like maybe the Slod. There are some D&D monsters that can act like the xenomorphs. I want to look at that because again, D&D is our bread and butter. We can talk about the Slotty, and we can also talk about maybe another type of monster that comes to mind if we're talking about the reproductive cycle of xenomorphs. But there's a couple other ways that I want to talk about horror in this sci-fi setting as well. And when I come back from break, I am going to be having a giveaway. And if any of you want capsules, prize capsules for yourself or to give to others, that's a great time to get in on it before Derek and I start chatting up about, you know, how can AI be a threat? How can whatever be a threat, etc., etc. So we'll see you soon, everyone.